I never thought I'd reach a point where I'd have to choose between my family and my own happiness. But here I am, standing at the edge of a decision that will change everything. My name is Sarah, and this is my story. I live with my dad, my stepmom, Lauren, and her son, Alex. My mom passed away when I was little, so it's been just me and Dad for most of my life. Things were good back then. He wasn't perfect, but he tried. Then Lauren came along. At first, I was happy for Dad. He deserved someone. But soon, it became clear that I was no longer a priority. Lauren is the kind of person who always finds a way to get what she wants. She married my dad, moved into our house, and somehow, without anyone realizing it, took control of everything. And Alex, her son, is even worse. He's a couple of years older than me, but he acts like a spoiled teenager. He doesn't work, doesn't clean, and spends most of his time playing video games or going out with his friends. Meanwhile, I work a full-time job while taking night classes. I help with groceries, pay for the internet, and even cover utility bills when my dad forgets. I don't mind helping. Family is family, right? But lately, I've started feeling like I'm being used. Dad works long hours, so he's barely home. Lauren doesn't work at all. She spends her days shopping, getting her nails done, and complaining about how expensive life is. And Alex, he doesn't even pretend to try. He's always looking for a job, but somehow he never finds one. Last month, I started noticing that the house was feeling more and more like a burden. No matter how much I contributed, it was never enough. Lauren would still make little comments about how I should do more and act like an adult. And then, this morning, she crossed the line. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking my coffee before work, when Lauren walked in. She didn't even say good morning. Instead, she just dropped a piece of paper in front of me. I frowned and picked it up. It was a printed out bill. "You need to start paying rent," she said, crossing her arms. "It's only fair." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh. She didn't. I set the paper down. "I already help with bills." "That's different," she said. "This is about responsibility. You're an adult. You should contribute more." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I already contribute. More than Alex. Why doesn't he pay rent? Lauren sighed, like she was exhausted from dealing with me. "Alex is still figuring things out. You have a job. It's time to step up." I felt my stomach twist. "So, I should pay rent while he does nothing?" "You're being dramatic," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's not a big deal. Just a few hundred a month." I looked over at Dad, who had just walked in. He must have heard everything, but he didn't say a word. He just poured himself some coffee, acting like this conversation wasn't happening. That's when it hit me. He wasn't going to defend me. He was going to let her do this. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "I'm not paying rent," I said. Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe it's time you moved out." She said it so casually, like she had been waiting for the chance to say it, like she had already decided I wasn't part of this family anymore. I looked at my dad one last time, hoping, praying he'd say something, but he just stood there, staring at his coffee like it was the most interesting thing in the world. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Fine." Lauren blinked. "Excuse me." I said fine. I repeated, "I'll move out." For the first time, she looked surprised. She probably expected me to argue, to beg, but I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I turned and left the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving the life I had known. Packing my things felt strange. I had spent my whole life in this house, but now, looking around my room, I realized how little of it actually belonged to me. The furniture, bought by my dad and Lauren. The decorations, most of them picked out by Lauren over the years, slowly replacing everything that reminded me of my mom. Even the air in this house felt like it wasn't mine anymore. I tossed some clothes into a suitcase, grabbed my laptop, and shoved a few personal things into a backpack. The more I packed, the lighter I felt. It was like I had been carrying this weight on my shoulders for years, and now, finally, I was setting it down. I wasn't stupid. I knew this decision would have consequences. Moving out meant I was on my own. No more free meals. No more roof over my head. No backup plan. But it also meant freedom. No more being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. No more Lauren. As I zipped up my bag, there was a knock on my door. I sighed, already knowing who it was. Alex stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking like he had already won something. "So, you're actually leaving?" I didn't answer. I just grabbed my bag and walked past him. "Wow, you're really overreacting," he said, following me down the hall. "It's just a little rent. You act like you're being kicked out." I turned to face him, gripping my bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Why don't you pay rent, Alex?" He blinked, caught off guard. Because you don't do anything." I cut him off. "You don't work. You don't help. You just sit around and let Mom handle everything for you. And now she wants me to pay for it." I shook my head. "No, I'm done." I pushed past him and headed downstairs. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone, pretending like this wasn't happening. Lauren was in the living room, flipping through a magazine, looking completely unbothered. I stopped at the door and looked back at him one last time. "Are you really okay with this?" I asked. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were tired, full of something that almost looked like regret, but he didn't say anything. That was my answer. I swallowed hard and walked out. The air outside was crisp, and for the first time in years, I could actually breathe. I had nowhere to go, not really. I had some money saved, but not enough to get a nice apartment. Still, I wasn't about to let that stop me. I pulled out my phone and started looking for cheap rentals in the area. It took a few hours, a lot of rejected calls, and a growing sense of panic before I found something. It wasn't much, just a tiny studio apartment in an old building across town. The rent was low, mostly because the place was half falling apart, but I didn't care. I met the landlord, signed the papers, and by the evening, I was standing in my new home. It was small. Really small. The kitchen was basically just a counter with a sink and a microwave. The walls were a dull beige color, and there was a weird stain on the carpet. I tried not to look at too closely, but it was mine. I dropped my bags on the floor and let out a shaky breath. I had done it. I had actually done it. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The first night in my new apartment was strange. It wasn't bad, just different. There was no yelling from downstairs, no passive-aggressive comments from Lauren, no sound of Alex playing video games at full volume like he paid the bills. Just silence. Pure, uninterrupted silence. It should have felt lonely, but instead, it was peaceful. I lay on the old, slightly uncomfortable mattress that came with the apartment, staring at the ceiling. The reality of what I had done was settling in. I had left. For real. There was no going back now. No safety net if things went wrong. It was terrifying, but also thrilling. I had been treated like an outsider in my own home for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to be in control of my own life. Morning came too quickly, and with it, the realization that I needed to figure things out fast. Rent wasn't going to pay itself. I already had a job, but it barely covered the essentials. I needed to find something better. Something that would let me stay independent. I got up, made myself a sad breakfast of instant coffee and a granola bar, and sat at the tiny counter, scrolling through job listings on my phone. Most of them were garbage. Must have 5 years of experience for an entry-level position. Flexible hours, which really meant they could schedule me anytime they wanted. The more I searched, the more frustrated I got. After an hour, I gave up and got ready for my shift. My job at the cafe wasn't glamorous, but it was something. I tied my apron around my waist, pulled my hair back, and stepped behind the counter, ready for another day of dealing with impatient customers and terrible tips. It was a slow morning, the kind where time felt like it had stopped. I wiped down counters, refilled the sugar dispensers, and pretended to be busy whenever my manager walked by. Then, just as I was about to start restocking the shelves, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I wasn't supposed to check it during work, but something told me to. I pulled it out, just for a second, and my stomach twisted. A missed call from my dad. That was unexpected. He never called me. If anything, I had expected Lauren to send some snarky text about how I was being selfish or dramatic. But my dad? That was new. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to call him back. Maybe he had realized how unfair Lauren was being. Maybe he wanted to apologize, to tell me I could come back, and everything would be different. Or maybe he just needed something. I shoved my phone back in my pocket and got back to work. The call nagged at me the entire shift. By the time I clocked out, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I sat on a bench outside the cafe, took a deep breath, and hit redial. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Emma," he said, his voice sounding more tired than usual. "I was hoping you'd call back." I didn't say anything, waiting for him to get to the point. There was a long pause, then a sigh. "Look, things are a little tight right now." There it was. I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone tighter. "Tight how?" Another pause. "We're behind on a few bills. It's nothing serious, but Lauren thought maybe you could help out. Just a little." I almost laughed. After everything, they still expected me to be the responsible one. "Dad," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even. "You do realize I moved out because of this, right? Because I was already helping, and Lauren wanted even more." "I know," he admitted, "and I get it. I do. But things aren't as simple as you think. Your brother was supposed to." He stopped, as if realizing he had said too much. I frowned. "Alex was supposed to what?" Silence. I suddenly felt sick. I knew my brother was lazy, but something about my dad's hesitation made it seem worse. "Alex was paying the bills, right?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. More silence. "Dad," a heavy sigh. "We thought he was. Lauren handled the finances, and she said he was taking care of it." I ran a hand through my hair, disbelief washing over me. "So let me get this straight. You guys assumed Alex was covering everything? You never checked. You never asked." "We trusted him," my dad said, but even he didn't sound convinced. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "Unbelievable. Emma, please. I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious." I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't my problem, that they had made their choices, and now they had to deal with them. But this was my dad, and as much as I hated what he let Lauren do to me, I couldn't ignore the fact that he sounded desperate. I exhaled slowly. "I need time to think about it." "Of course," he said quickly. "Take your time." I hung up without saying goodbye. As I sat there, staring at my phone, a million thoughts ran through my head. I had spent years cleaning up after Alex's mistakes, after Lauren's bad decisions. I had finally broken free, started a life where I wasn't responsible for fixing everything. And now, they wanted me to come back. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but one thing was clear. No matter what, I couldn't let them pull me back into that mess. I spent the next few days trying to focus on my own life, but the conversation with my dad kept creeping into my thoughts. Every time I opened my bank app, I felt that familiar weight pressing down on my chest. I barely had enough to keep myself afloat, and yet, a small part of me felt guilty for not helping. That guilt was exactly what Lauren had used against me for years. I wasn't going to fall for it again. At least, that's what I told myself. Work became my escape. At the cafe, I could turn off my brain and focus on the routine, grinding coffee, steaming milk, forcing a smile at rude customers who treated me like I didn't exist. It wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable. Unlike my family, it was the middle of my shift when I saw him. Alex. He walked through the cafe doors like he had all the time in the world, looking exactly the same. Messy hair, expensive sneakers, that smug expression that made me want to throw a latte in his face. I stared at him, my grip tightening around the cloth I was using to wipe the counter. He wasn't supposed to be here. He spotted me, grinned, and strolled up to the counter like we were old friends. "Hey sis," he said, leaning on the counter. "Long time no see." I forced a neutral expression. "What do you want, Alex?" He held up his hands. "Relax. Can't a guy just visit his sister at work?" I said nothing. He sighed. "Fine. Dad told me he called you. Look, I get it, you're pissed. But this whole thing got blown way out of proportion." I raised an eyebrow. Blown out of proportion. You lied about paying bills, Alex. That's not a small thing. He scratched the back of his neck. I didn't lie. I just had other things going on. I let out a sharp laugh. Other things? Like what? He hesitated for a second too long. That's when I knew. He wasn't just being lazy. He had been hiding something. Alex, I said slowly, where did the money go? He looked away, suddenly interested in the menu board. My stomach twisted. Oh my God. You spent it, didn't you? On what? Gambling? A car? His jaw clenched. It's not that simple. I felt heat rise to my face. It's literally that simple. You took money meant for rent and bills and spent it on yourself. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing around. Jesus, Emma, you always overreact. I could feel my fingers trembling. I wanted to scream at him, to call him every name in the book, but I couldn't afford to get fired over him. I took a deep breath. Why are you really here, Alex? He shifted uncomfortably. Look, I'm trying to fix this, okay? But I need time. I just need you to cover things for a little while. I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. Unbelievable. You screw up, and I'm the one who has to fix it? Again, I swear I'll pay you back, he said. Just a couple hundred. Please. I stared at him, my mind racing. I had spent years bailing him out. Every time, he promised it was the last time. And every time, he came back asking for more. But this time was different. This time, I had something to lose. I straightened my shoulders. No. His eyes widened. What? I said no, Alex. For the first time in his life, he looked genuinely surprised. Emma, come on. It's not that big of a deal. It is to me. He scoffed. So that's it. You're just gonna let Dad struggle. I flinched. He knew exactly where to hit me. I'm not responsible for fixing your mess, I said, my voice quieter now. If you care so much, figure it out yourself. His jaw tightened. Fine. Whatever. He turned and walked out without another word. I stood there, gripping the counter, my heart pounding. For the first time in my life, I had said no to him, and it felt damn good. I thought saying no to Alex would bring me peace. That for once, I had drawn a line, and he would finally get the message. But I should have known better. The next few days were eerily quiet. No texts from my dad. No guilt-tripping calls. No surprise visits from Alex. It should have been a relief, but instead, it left a knot in my stomach. Then, on Friday night, my phone rang. I was curled up on my tiny couch, eating cold leftover pasta, when I saw my dad's name on the screen. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but at the last second, I answered. Emma, he said, his voice tired. Can we talk? I hesitated. If this is about money, Dad, It's not. He sighed. I need to see you. Please. Something in his voice made my chest tighten. Fine, I said. Where? Home. The word sent a chill through me. That house wasn't my home anymore. Still, against my better judgment, I agreed. An hour later, I was standing in front of the house I had spent most of my life in. The porch light flickered weakly, and the front yard looked even more unkempt than usual. I had always been the one to pull the weeds, to water the plants. Without me, the place looked like it was wilting. I stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me was how quiet it was. No TV blaring in the background, no passive-aggressive bickering between Lauren and my dad, just an uneasy stillness. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. He looked older than I remembered, his hair thinner, his shoulders slumped. Sit, he said. I sat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I know I haven't been the best father. I blinked. That was unexpected. I let a lot of things slide. He continued. I let Lauren take charge because I thought she knew what she was doing. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to see what was really happening. I swallowed. And what was really happening? His fingers tightened around the mug. She drained me, Emma. Financially, emotionally. And I let her. Because it was easier than standing up to her. I exhaled slowly. And now, he looked at me, his eyes weary. She's gone. I froze. What? She left, he said. Packed her things and walked out 3 days ago. Said she was done. I tried to process his words. Lauren? Gone. After all these years of controlling everything? Why? I asked. Dad let out a bitter laugh. Because there was nothing left to take. The words hung in the air. She drained my savings, he admitted. Took out credit cards in my name. The mortgage payments are 3 months behind. He looked at me, almost ashamed. I didn't even know how bad it was until she left. My stomach twisted. I had always known Lauren was manipulative, but this was a whole new level. I shook my head. So what now? Dad sighed. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. But I don't think I can do it alone. I knew what he was asking, and I knew I couldn't give it to him. I can't move back, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I won't. His face fell slightly, but he nodded. I understand. I wasn't sure he did, but I said, exhaling, I'll help where I can. Not financially. I can barely afford my own bills. But I don't know, help you figure things out. Dad looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't disappointment. Thank you, he said quietly. I nodded, but my chest felt heavy, because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I left my father's house feeling like I had stepped into some alternate reality. Lauren was gone, just like that. After years of running everything, making the rules, turning my father into her puppet, she had vanished, leaving behind nothing but debt and destruction. I should have felt relieved. I should have laughed and said, good riddance. But instead, I just felt tired. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. My tiny apartment felt even smaller as I dropped onto my bed, fully clothed. The weight of the conversation with my dad pressed down on me, making it impossible to relax. He had looked so lost, and for the first time, I saw him not as the man who let Lauren walk all over me, but as someone who had been just as trapped as I was. I stared at the ceiling, knowing I wouldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same question. Was this my responsibility? The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing. A text from Alex. Hey, I heard about Lauren. Can we talk? I groaned, tossing the phone aside. I didn't want to deal with Alex right now. He was part of the problem. He had lived in that house, watched everything happen, and never lifted a damn finger to help. And now that things had fallen apart, now he wanted to talk. I ignored the message, but he didn't give up. Emma, please. Just 5 minutes. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. As much as I wanted to pretend he didn't exist, I knew he wasn't going to stop. So, against my better judgment, I texted back. Fine. Coffee shop on 8th noon. When I got there, Alex was already waiting, looking unusually nervous. He had always been too smooth, too sure of himself. Seeing him unsettled was strange. I wasn't sure you'd show, he admitted as I sat down. I crossed my arms. I almost didn't. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I know you're pissed at me. Pissed doesn't even cover it, I said. You let me take the fall for everything, Alex. You knew what was happening, and you just let it happen. His jaw tightened. I didn't let anything happen. Oh, really? I laughed bitterly. So you didn't watch Lauren drain Dad's money while I was the only one paying bills? You didn't know she was taking out credit cards in his name? His silence was enough of an answer. I didn't think it was that bad, he finally muttered. I thought Dad had it under control. I shook my head. You thought I had it under control. Because I always did. And the second I left, everything collapsed. He swallowed, looking down at his coffee. Yeah, I guess it did. I expected him to fight back, to make excuses, but he didn't. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me, and said something that caught me off guard. I'm sorry. I blinked. What? I should have done more, he admitted. I should have seen what was happening, but I didn't want to deal with it, so I just ignored it, and that wasn't fair to you. I didn't know how to respond to that. For so long, I had painted Alex as the golden boy, the one who never had to struggle, never had to take responsibility. And while that was still true in a lot of ways, maybe I had been too focused on my own resentment to see that he wasn't as invincible as I thought. I don't know how to fix this, he said, but I want to try. I exhaled slowly, then start by actually showing up. He nodded. I will. For the first time in a long time, I actually believed him, but I also knew that belief wasn't enough. He had to prove it. I didn't want to get involved. That was the thought running through my head as I walked back to my apartment. The conversation with Alex still fresh in my mind. He had apologized, and for the first time, it felt real. But words were easy. Action was what mattered. A few days passed, and I focused on my own life. Work was exhausting, but at least it was mine. No one could take that from me. Every evening, I came home to my tiny apartment, made dinner, and enjoyed the silence. No tension, no accusations, no feeling like I had to walk on eggshells. Then my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Hey, Emma. His voice sounded weaker than usual, tired in a way that made my stomach twist. I was wondering if you could come over, just for a bit. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that he and Alex needed to figure things out on their own, but something in his tone stopped me. I'll be there in an hour. When I arrived, the house felt different. The weight that Lauren had left behind still clung to the walls, but it wasn't just that. It was emptier, more fragile. Dad sat at the kitchen table, a pile of unpaid bills in front of him. He looked older than I remembered, as if the stress of everything had caught up with him overnight. Thanks for coming, he said, offering a tired smile. I sat across from him. What's going on? He sighed, rubbing his hands together. I don't know how to fix this, Emma. I let Lauren take control of everything. I trusted her with the finances, with the house, and now I see how stupid that was. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. She maxed out credit cards in my name, took out loans I didn't even know about. The mortgage is 3 months behind. I don't know if I can catch up. His voice cracked. I might lose the house. I should have felt bad for him. I should have felt some kind of sympathy. But all I could think about was the years I had spent breaking my back to keep this house running while he stood by and let it happen. You let her do this, I said finally. He flinched. I know. You let her treat me like a tenant while I was paying for everything. And now, after everything, you want me to fix it? No, he said quickly. I don't expect you to fix it. I don't know what to do. For the first time, I saw the regret in his eyes. Real regret. Not just because he had lost something, but because he had finally realized what he had allowed to happen. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. You have options, Dad. You could sell the house before the bank takes it. Find something smaller, more manageable. He swallowed. This is our home. It was, I corrected. But it's also just a house. And if you keep holding on to it out of pride, you're going to end up with nothing. Silence stretched between us. I could see the internal battle playing out in his expression. Finally, he nodded. You're right. It was the first time I had ever heard him say that to me. We spent the next hour going through paperwork. I helped him look at his options, explained the process of selling before foreclosure, and for the first time, I felt like he was actually listening. As I stood to leave, he reached for my hand. Emma, I know I can't undo everything, but I want you to know I see it now. Everything you did for this family, and I'm sorry I didn't appreciate it sooner. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive him, but for the first time, I believed he meant it, and maybe that was enough. For now. I walked out of my father's house feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but at the same time, a new kind of exhaustion settled deep in my bones. Confronting him had drained me in a way I hadn't expected. Maybe it was because, for the first time, I had truly said everything I wanted to say. Or maybe it was because, despite everything, there was still a part of me that had hoped for a different outcome. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing in particular. The silence in the car felt suffocating, pressing against my ears, reminding me just how much had changed. My phone buzzed in my lap, pulling me out of my thoughts. Alex. I just sat there for a second, staring at his name on the screen. After everything, I wasn't sure I had the energy for another conversation, but something inside me, something I couldn't quite name, made me swipe to answer. Hey, I said, my voice coming out more tired than I intended. Hey, he echoed. He sounded hesitant, like he wasn't sure if I was going to hang up on him. Are you busy? I glanced at the house in my rearview mirror, my father's shadow still visible through the front window. Not really, I said finally. Can I see you? There was a time when those words would have made my heart race, when I would have dropped everything just to spend time with him. But that time was long gone. Now, all I felt was hesitation. Where? I asked cautiously. Mom's old diner. 10 minutes. I sighed. Fine. The drive there was short, but it felt longer, my thoughts circling around everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. My father, my past, Alex, Lauren. It was all tangled together in a mess I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to clean up. When I pulled up, Alex was already inside, sitting in a booth near the window. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. His hair was messier than usual, and his shoulders were tense, like he was bracing himself for another fight. I pushed open the diner door, and a little bell chimed overhead. The place hadn't changed at all since we were kids. The green vinyl booths were still the same, the counter still lined with its old-fashioned stools. It smelled like coffee and pancakes, and for a second, the familiarity of it almost made me feel safe. Almost. Alex stood when he saw me, like he wasn't sure if I'd actually sit down. I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my expression neutral. Thanks for coming, he said, his voice careful. I raised an eyebrow. So, what is it? He let out a slow breath. I don't know how to fix this, Emma. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Seems to be a theme lately. He ran a hand over his face. I mean it. I let her manipulate me. I let her twist everything. And I didn't stop her when I should have. And I let you take the fall for things that weren't your fault. He exhaled sharply. I don't know how to make that right. I studied him, trying to figure out if this was just another way for him to make himself feel better, or if he actually meant it. Do you even know what you want? I asked finally. He hesitated. I want my sister back. His words hit harder than I expected. I looked away, picking at the cracked surface of the table. It's not that simple, Alex. I know, he admitted, but I need you to know something. I didn't just ask you to meet me, so I could apologize again. I have to tell you something about Lauren. That got my attention. My eyes snapped back to his, searching his face for any sign of what was coming. She's still around, he said carefully. She left Dad, yeah. Took everything she could. But she's not gone, Emma. And I don't think she's done. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? She's been talking to people. Old friends. People who might help her twist things even more. I frowned. Like who? He hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. I don't know for sure, but I heard something the other day. She's talking about money she still deserves. And Emma, I think she's planning something. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course she is. I'm serious, Alex said, leaning forward. I don't know what she's up to, but I don't trust her. And I don't want you caught up in it. I shook my head. She's already taken everything she could from me. There's nothing left for her to take. Alex didn't look convinced. Just be careful, okay? I didn't answer right away. A part of me wanted to believe that Lauren was finally out of my life, that she had already done enough damage and would move on to some other unfortunate soul. But deep down, I knew better. Lauren didn't let go that easily. And if Alex was right, if she was still scheming, still looking for ways to make me pay for things I hadn't even done, then this wasn't over. Not even close. I sat back in the booth, my thoughts a jumbled mess. Alex's words echoed in my mind, his warning about Lauren still ringing in my ears. I didn't know how to react to that. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all, to believe that everything with her was behind me. But there was another part of me, the part that had spent years being manipulated by her, that couldn't shake the feeling of dread creeping up my spine. Lauren never left people alone. If she was still out there, still scheming, there was no telling what she might do next. Alex watched me carefully, waiting for my response. I could feel his eyes on me, his expression full of regret, but also full of something else. Hope. I hadn't seen that in him in a long time, and it made me uneasy. Hope was dangerous when it came to our family. It always led to disappointment. Do you really think she's up to something? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Alex nodded, his jaw tight. I do. I've heard things. And I know her well enough to know that she won't just disappear. She never does. I leaned forward, rubbing my temples. I wasn't sure if I was tired or just frustrated, but my head was starting to throb. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I didn't know how, he admitted quietly. I didn't want to drag you back into all of it. I didn't want to make things worse for you. Things are already bad enough, I muttered under my breath, more to myself than to him. Emma. Alex's voice was softer now, almost apologetic. I know I messed up. I know I should have done more. But I'm telling you now, we have to figure this out before it gets any worse. I raised an eyebrow, finally looking up at him. And how do you suggest we do that? We don't even know where she is. Alex's eyes narrowed. I'm not sure yet, but I've been thinking. There are people in the old neighborhood who still talk to her. If we can find out what she's planning, maybe we can stop it before it goes too far. I shook my head slowly. I don't want to get involved with any of that again. I'm done with all of it, Alex. I've been through enough. I've finally gotten away from all the chaos she caused. I get that, he said, his voice tight. But she's not going to let you go that easily. She's already done enough damage, and she's not going to stop. I need you to understand that. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about stopping her from hurting anyone else. I looked down at my hands, trying to push away the feeling of unease that had taken root in my chest. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to go back to that place where I felt like I was drowning in my family's mess. But I also couldn't ignore the reality of what Alex was saying. If Lauren was still out there, still causing trouble, it was only a matter of time before it affected me again. Okay, I said quietly, my voice steady but unsure. I'll help you. But I'm not going to dive back into this head first. I need to know what we're dealing with before I get too involved. Alex's face softened, and he nodded. I get it. I won't push you. But we have to figure this out, Em. For your sake, for everyone's sake. I felt the weight of his words settle heavily in the pit of my stomach. I didn't want to go back to my old life, but I didn't see how I could ignore this. Lauren had never been a simple problem to solve. She was a storm that tore through everything in its path, and no matter how much time passed, it was always just a matter of time before she came back to cause more damage. After a moment, I took a deep breath. All right, what's the plan? Alex leaned back in his seat, his fingers drumming on the table as he thought. We start small. I'll reach out to some of the people I know from the old days. I'll see if I can get any information on what Lauren's been up to. In the meantime, I'll keep an eye on Dad. He's been on edge lately, and I don't think he realizes how much danger he's in if she's really still out there. You really think she'll go after him too? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. Alex nodded gravely. She's already hurt him once. She won't stop. She knows his weaknesses, and she'll use them against him if it gets her what she wants. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. The thought of my father being dragged into Lauren's mess again was too much to bear. But I knew Alex was right. She had no limits, no boundaries, and no one was safe from her. I'll help, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. But only if we do it carefully. I don't want to make things worse. We will, Alex promised. We'll take it slow. One step at a time. I nodded, but doubt still gnawed at the back of my mind. Was it worth it? Was it worth reopening old wounds, risking everything again, just to stop Lauren from causing more chaos? I wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let her keep controlling me, controlling my family. As we sat there in silence, I realized that no matter how much I wanted to be free of my past, I couldn't completely escape it. Lauren had a way of pulling everyone back in, whether we were ready for it or not. And as much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't let her win. Not again. It's been weeks since I made the decision to leave. I convinced myself that cutting ties with my family was the only way I could live with peace of mind. But even now, it's hard to say if I was truly at peace with it. Sure, I had my little apartment. I had control over my own space. But that emptiness, that nagging feeling, wouldn't go away. It's like it followed me everywhere, reminding me of the people I left behind. I thought that the distance would make it easier to breathe, but the guilt never really went away, especially when my father called me out of the blue one evening. His voice was cracked, as if he'd been holding back something for a while. I felt my chest tighten at the sound. "Hey, it's Dad," he said. I didn't reply right away. It felt like he was waiting for me to say something, anything. But my mind was racing. My first instinct was to hang up. But then his voice got lower, more desperate. I need your help. We're in a bad spot, honey. Can we talk?" It's funny how, even after everything, how we'd fought, how I'd left, I still found myself caring. A part of me wanted to believe he was just reaching out to apologize, to admit that everything that went wrong wasn't just on me. But I knew better. I wasn't that naive anymore. Still, I agreed to meet him. That meeting happened 2 days later. I stood outside the cafe, my hands stuffed in the pockets of my jacket, my heart beating fast. I couldn't decide if I was angry or just heartbroken. My father looked older, the lines on his face deeper, his hair thinner. He hadn't aged well. Or maybe he had, but it felt more like life had beat him down. Too much too fast. "I don't know how to start," he said, avoiding my eyes. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him why he hadn't been there when I needed him, why he hadn't stepped up when everything was falling apart, why it was always me having to deal with the fallout. But instead, I just said, "Start by telling me what happened." We've been struggling. Money's tight. Your brother, he's not doing his part. He keeps saying he'll pay, but it's all lies. We're behind on bills. We're gonna lose the house if we don't figure this out." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to shout, "I told you this would happen." But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence hang in the air between us. "Your brother, he hasn't been paying anything, Emma," he continued, almost pleading. "I thought he would take care of things. I thought I could rely on him, but I was wrong. And now, well, you know how it goes. We don't have enough money coming in, and now I'm asking for your help." I could feel my jaw tighten, my fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how unfair this was, how it was always on me doing all the work, me holding everything together. But I didn't. I stayed silent. I felt the weight of everything I'd been holding inside pressing on me, suffocating me. "So you think I should just come back and fix everything? Like I've done before?" His eyes finally met mine, and for a moment, I saw something in them. Regret, maybe. But then the guilt came flooding in, and I felt myself soften just a little. "I don't expect you to come back, Emma. His voice cracked, and he stopped, unable to continue. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I can't fix this. You need to figure it out on your own." He didn't say anything. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. My heart was racing, and all I wanted was to leave, to run away from all of it. But something in me told me I needed to hear him out. Finally, my father spoke again, his voice quieter now. "We're not going to make it through this, Emma. I just thought, maybe you could give us one last chance to make things right. I know I messed up. I know I wasn't there for you like I should have been. But we're family, and family helps each other out." Family. That word used to mean something to me. But now it felt hollow, empty, like a shell of something I once believed in. "I'm sorry," I said, standing up. I didn't want to cry in front of him. I didn't want to give him that satisfaction. But I'm done. I can't go back to that. I've worked too hard to get to this point. My father didn't try to stop me as I walked away. He didn't say anything else, and I didn't look back. When I got back to my apartment, I sat down on the couch and stared at the wall. The weight of everything, of the guilt, the anger, the sadness, it all hit me at once. I wasn't sure what I had hoped for. I wasn't sure if I expected him to change, to become the father I needed him to be. But it didn't happen. I thought about my decision to leave. Was it the right one? Or had I just thrown everything away, only to end up feeling empty and alone? In the end, I didn't have the answers. But as I sat there in the silence of my apartment, I realized one thing. I didn't need my father to fix me. I didn't need anyone to fix me. I was capable of standing on my own. And maybe that's all I needed. Maybe I wasn't running away. Maybe I was finally running towards something better, something real.
Thank you very much for watching. Did you like this story? Like, subscribe, and write a comment about your opinion.